glad to hear the second part that she'll share with us, which is the lives of the enslaved plantation post-Reconstruction. So this will, I think, based on what I know, give a context for where we are today with regard to racial reconciliation. So I'm very grateful for Toby being with us again tonight. And I will just let her start. Oh, one thing before I forget, so that, make sure everyone who's here hears this. We do have a list of readings that Toby shared with us. It's on the church website at the Recitals page, if anyone wants to reference that for further information. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Toby, and thank you so much for being with us.
Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you all again. When I met you first, it was the beginning of February. Now we're getting ready to say goodbye to February. Time has moved on. So much has happened since I saw you all the last time. It has been, for starters, crazy busy at McLeod. Tours are 45, 47, 58 people. It is extraordinary, and people are coming for such a multitude of reasons, coming because they heard about us on the BBC or Washington Post, New York Times. And they're coming because they're curious about how we're dealing with this recent situation with CRT. There is some legislation in our state house that's moving forward at this time. So it's a little bit challenging in that regard, but I think it makes us more resolved to stand where we are and to stand firm about the messages and the lessons of McLeod. I had this presentation done and prepared, and a few days ago, that lightning bolt of inspiration hit me, and I threw that out and started over, because what I wanted to do was to group together people who told the story of post-Reconstruction and what happens. I wanted to show it through their life and their times, rather than just bombarding you with endless amounts of facts, because we can go there, but I didn't want to do that. So as a result, I made the presentation too large to send. So that's why I'm screen sharing it tonight, but I'm not daunted by that. All right, family, let's get started. Racial Reconciliation, the McLeod Story, Part 2. I want to just reiterate, McLeod is one of those two places in the country that looks at the issue of slavery from the standpoint. The other is our colleagues at Whitney in Louisiana. I wanted you to have our web address and to know our hours, Sunday 9 to 4, and a phone number. So just for your info and to refer people to us. McLeod is also a member of the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. This means so very much to us. I've included their web address, so if you're not familiar with them, I would encourage a visit to see the great work that they're doing. We talked the last time about the Gullah Geechee Heritage Corridor. I do want to reiterate how important this is. Senator Ralph Warnock just recently helped ensure that the legislation would go forward for another, I think, 5 to 10 years. Very, very significant. So this corridor will stay in place. There's wonderful things to do. If you've never been to this part of the country, please visit their website and learn more about the Gullah Geechee people and the Gullah Geechee Nation. I wanted you to look one more time at this map of McLeod. We talked the last time that McLeod was once 1,700 acres. The dark blue is the total acreage, but the light blue swatch in the middle there is what remains of McLeod. And even now, looking at this, I'm still amazed at how large this place is. It never occurred to me how substantially huge one plantation could be. If you look over on this corner, actually this little tip here, and you go directly across the water, that literally takes you to the Battery. So when you come to Charleston and you stand on Murray Boulevard and you look over, you know that you were looking at what was once McLeod Plantation. So the proximity to the water is crucial to this story. When you come to McLeod and we go down to the water, I talk about the fact that we think the water is the reason that McLeod was not destroyed, not burned down during the war. It just wouldn't have made sense because of the proximity to the water. So I just want you to see the scope of how large it was and to think about those 74 to 100 people who were scattered throughout any part of what you're looking at, collecting, processing that Sea Island cotton, as well as the sweet potatoes, the peas, the beans, churning the 600 pounds of butter. All of that work was done within the confines of what you are looking at today. And I am so convinced, until I have no breath left, that there had to be more people. It boggles my mind that that small number of people could have done that much work. So I'm determined to redouble my efforts to find the rest of those folks and to bring their humanity to light. Let's talk about now what happened after the war. And there's so much that happened. So I honed in on a few key dates. I want you to note in 1862, 9 people self-emancipated. One of those was a man named William Dawson. We're going to talk about the Dawsons more. 9 people walking off a plantation was a huge thing. That didn't happen casually. And adding a little more grist to this mill, we have found some very obscure naval records which indicate that as many as 400 other people left plantations along the Sea Islands in that same year of 1862. Something else remarkable happened, and those of you who know Charleston history will be familiar with the man named Robert Smalls. In May, Robert Smalls stole a Confederate ship called the Planter and took it out into the seas, Union area, and turned it over to the Union forces. Is it possible that Robert Smalls leaving was the beginning of the exodus of those 400 people, of which our 9 from McLeod could be included? It is a fascinating study, and we don't have enough data to link them directly, but the notes in the naval records tell us quite a bit. So we're working on putting that piece together so that we can add it to the tour in a more concise way. In 1864, William Wallace McLeod left for the last time. He departed for the war. He would not return. He would die in February of 1860. In 1865, the Massachusetts 55th would liberate Charleston. Now, many people think that this was the Massachusetts 54th because of the movie Glory. Those men were slaughtered over on Morris Island, which is behind McLeod. It was the 55th that came through the streets of Charleston. And there's a very famous photo that was in Harper's Weekly of an artist's rendering of what that looked like. Later that year, Circular 13, General Sherman, which said that 40 acres and the mule, that mule that maybe will show up someday, we're still waiting on the mule. If you come to a Sea Island, he said, you can have these 40 acres and you can start over. But a few months later, Circular 15 would say, well, maybe not. And really what happened is the Confederate farmers were given an opportunity to come back and get their land. And all they had to do was sign an oath of loyalty and say they would never do what they had done again. So here are people who have survived slavery, survived the war, get these 40 acres, and then they're told, give them back or we're going to kill you. We have documentation of about 20 families who lived at McLeod who received those land grants, and they were forced to give them back. Initially also, things were so difficult after the period of slavery ended. There was a smallpox epidemic that wiped out about 4,000 people on James Island. The weather was utterly horrific. There were crop failures, night riders, and the militia. How much more do they have to pay for freedom? And then in 1869, the McLeod kids come back from the upstate where they had been, and they wanted their land and they wanted their citizenship back, and they would eventually get both of those. So this brings us to the period that we want to look at a little bit called Reconstruction. Most misunderstood, probably in history. And what we remember Reconstruction for is the widespread beginnings of empowerment that Black people would feel and be able to participate in the South. Men running for higher office and winning, a few men from James Island participating in constitutional conventions, literally rewriting the laws of the state. And then we have the Reconstruction Amendments. Who can tell me what the 13th did? Anybody remember? Where are my history buffs in the room?
Sorry.
The 13th Amendment abolished slavery.
I couldn't hear what you were saying. Sorry.
13th Amendment. What did the 14th Amendment do? Does anybody remember?
The voting one or the women voting?
The 14th said if you were born here, you were a citizen here. The 15th Amendment gave who the right to vote?
Men.
Black men. Black men the right to vote. And it would cause a firestorm. It would absolutely cause a firestorm. When did Black women get the right to vote universally? That's a bit of a trick, isn't it? When did white women get the right to vote?
1920s, wasn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. And ideally, Black women should have been voting nationwide too. But the sad truth is state legislatures, especially in the South, doubled down on their efforts to suppress voting, particularly of Black women. And Black women did not vote universally until 1965 with the passage of the Voting Rights Act.
Oh, my word.
Yeah.
And the Voting Rights Act is now sitting up in Washington, gutted. And we may not see the passage again. And it hurts because this is the one last thing that Representative John Lewis wanted. On his deathbed, he was praying and believing that the Voting Rights Act would be passed, cleaned up again. So here we are at this point in time, worrying about people's ability to vote. That includes me. Then we look at Jim Crow. Jim Crow was a minstrel show that was largely reproduced throughout the South, started by one man, that was used to mock and depict Black people as inept, as incompetent, to chip away at these budding rights that had been brewing. And after Reconstruction would end, and it ended in large part with the election of Rutherford B. Hayes, then Jim Crow would be the rule. And that would include the rebuilding of all of the pieces of slavery, can we say, that had been torn down. It was an attempt to go backward. It was an attempt to nullify the rights that had now come to Black people. White males were adamant. They were not going to live under laws that had been written by Black men. So they simply began to recreate legal systems, recreate educational systems, recreate financial systems. And it worked, and it stuck for quite a long time. The Black codes that dictated what Black folks could and couldn't do would come out of this era. Intense violence, lynchings, mobs, all of this would erupt in this period after. It was a significant contraction. Reverend William Barber has written extensively about this. And so by the mid-40s now, something's beginning to shift, right? Something significant would happen. President Harry S. Truman would desegregate the military. And then 6 years later, Brown versus the Board of Education, which has its roots right here in South Carolina, up in Clarendon County, which said that separate but unequal was unconstitutional. But do you know that there were school districts in South Carolina that were still segregated up till 1990? They refused to let Black children in, and they kept tying the issue up in lawsuits. And so now we're in the period of civil rights. And I have to say, when you all remember when Barack Obama became our president, everybody threw their hands up and said, aha, we're post-racial. No, we're not. So in an overview, this is where we are. And in some ways, many ways, clearly, we have gone forward as Black and white folks, as a nation of Americans. but something is happening now where we're beginning to see ourselves going backward a bit. Let's talk about some milestones for the McLeods. In 1919, Willie Jr., that middle son, would die just as the renovation of the main house was taking place, just as Gone with the Wind was gearing up, right? Birth of a Nation, all of this would come about. Tourism would begin on the McLeod Plantation. Electricity would be added to the cabins, but there would be no plumbing. And the last families 40 years later are evicted. McLeod is sometimes called the last plantation because people were there for so incredibly long. This is the Slave Street or Slave Row. There were originally 23 cabins. These 6 that you see are the ones that are remaining, and they date back to roughly from 1750 up until 1850. We are not exactly sure when they were built. We've got a wide window there because we don't have the documentation. So that date is based on the materials and the manufacturing of, and I should say the hand construction, let me put it that way, of these cabins. They're roughly 12 by 40. And during the period of enslavement, it was not uncommon for 10 or more people to be in one of those cabins. I believe I shared this with you all the last time. This is the list of those 74 to 100. Whoops, what did I do? Let me come back here. 74 to 100 that we know. I wanted to blow their names up just a little bit. I hope I didn't pull it too much out of focus. There, some of the people that we're going to talk to are on this list, and we're going to start with the Dawsons. Let me get out of this before I touch it again. So just to reiterate, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and civil rights. From slavery to freedom, the Dawson family line, the Brown family line, the Forests, and the Gathers. I want you to keep those 4 names in mind because we're going to touch on them briefly as we look at what happened after. The Dawsons. Pompey Hard Times Dawson is the first Dawson that we can get a record of, 1821. He would have a son named William Dawson. William Dawson was one of the 9 who self-emancipated, who went to Folly Beach, became a soldier, and quite possibly one of the first Black Marines in this country. He would survive the war, go back to McLeod, get married. He had another son, Stepney Dawson, and then he remarried for the 3rd time. His first wife, Charity, died. His second wife, Hetty, died in the Great Shake, the earthquake of 1886. This wife, Annie Dawson, he would marry her the same year. Annie Dawson lived at McLeod for a number of years, and she and William, and so affectionately she called him Sailor, would go on to have 4 more children. William was, how do I say this? A lover of women. And he had a girlfriend while he was married to Annie. That girlfriend had a son, and that son has a granddaughter named Sharice Dawson. Sharice is a very good friend of McLeod, still lives on James Island, on Johns Island with her family. She is a tremendous source of information. She is now in her 40s. Her mother is still alive and she's in her 70s. And she has aunts who are in their 90s who recall being born on McLeod during those early years. So it's my hope to have a conversation with them and get all of their oral testimonies recorded. So in this one family alone, we've gone from pre-Civil War all the way up to modern times. And I'm begging Sharice to please write a book about her family story. Also, one other thing about Annie, I was looking at her death certificate maybe about 2 weeks ago, and it noted that she worked at the cigar factory in Charleston for nearly 30 years. Those of you who are civil rights history buffs will know that that cigar factory was pivotal because the workers there actually went on strike in the 1940s. I think they wanted a quarter, just a quarter. And it was a unique thing because there were white and Black folks striking together. But out of that, from Johns Island and from those protests would come the song, "We Shall Overcome." So little history on that. Annie Dawson was there 10 years prior to those strikes. So we're still digging out more information about her family. So it's fascinating to me now. And Sharice couldn't believe it, that she had a relative who was involved in civil rights at that time. The struggle for land. This affects the Dawsons. This is a copy of the Circular 13 from Washington, July 28, 1865. This sets the framework by which people were given those 40 acres and a mule, and also the establishment of something called the Freedmen's Bureau. And talk about a Herculean task. Their job was to help those 4 million newly freed people become citizens, to get education, to get medicine, to get glasses, to get books for schools. It was unbelievable what the Bureau did, but they were wildly unpopular and they were unfunded. So they didn't last very long, but they had a great deal of compassion for the newly released people, and they did their best to help them. There was a freedman's agent in McLeod living in the house, he and his wife, and Sharice's family is now trying to get the land back that they were given. We helped them find one of the original plats that went to Stepney Dawson, but the rest of their land has been mysteriously caught up in a title struggle. And so what the Freedmen's Bureau started is now being finished by an organization here in Charleston called the Center for Heirs Property. Somebody did a survey, and I was trying to find it. It documented how much land was lost and the wealth of that land. And it is a staggering figure. I've called this slide, History Comes to Visit History. The lady on the left, that is Sharice's mother. That document in her hand is the plat that we were able to give her of her family's land. The man on the right is my colleague, John Gardner. John is from St. Helena. He also has a plat from the land that his family was given in 1861. We're not talking about Beaufort tonight, but Beaufort fell early, and John's family was able to embrace all of that land and keep it because planters left. So his family still lives on that land from 1861. Let's talk about the Brown family. Look at the dates. 1856, a precious little girl named Leah comes to McLeod after being purchased by William Wallace McLeod. She's between 4 and 7. Leah gets married. She has a daughter named Lizzie. And Lizzie would have a daughter named Miss Maddie. Miss Maddie died in 2012. So the Brown family would live through slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and civil rights. There are still remnants of her family on James Island today. In fact, Miss Maddie's nephew, Ryan, is a lawyer, and he is a part of the team that's helping us make sure that the burial site is treated with respect and with compassion. So that's two families who have walked all the way through from that time frame. This is a picture of Miss Maddie at age 19. She's a beautiful young lady. And the quote she's talking to about her family grew up on McLeod. What my colleagues and I are curious about is she on the front steps or on the back? Because we know for a long time, Black people could not go to the front of the McLeod house. Our guess is this has to be back, and all of this shrubbery is remarkable because none of this is there today. And in fact, if you've been to McLeod, I suspect that the shrubbery backs up to what we now call the wisdom tree, that tree that is between 300 and 600 years old. This is Miss Maddie at age 19. This is Miss Maddie in her 50s. She would eventually leave McLeod. She got married. She and her husband saved up, and they were able to move away from McLeod in the 1950s. They purchased a home on James Island. So 1 or 2 generations after Leah gets here enslaved, now she has a granddaughter who is a homeowner. Miss Maddie would go on to have 8 children, and several of her children are still alive today. As I mentioned to you all, she passed away in 2012. So she lived long enough to see America's first Black president take over in the White House. Martin Becker, oh my goodness. The Becker family continues to surprise us. Martin Becker was a free Black man. I think I mentioned to him a little bit when we met the last time. He was born in East Guyana. His mother was an Indian. His father was from South Africa. And he grew up free. He went to school in Europe. He would join the Navy. And then he would petition to get his US citizenship during the Polk administration in the 1840s. But Martin Becker would also serve in the Massachusetts 55th. He and his wife, Carolyn, settled in Pittsburgh, Massachusetts, where they would raise their family. The second generation of Beckers were extraordinary. You see that brother standing in the middle? That is Martin Becker's son. He had an orchestra in Massachusetts at around the turn of the century. And they were quite good, by all accounts, very famous, very well beloved. That was one of his sons. This is another son, Charles Judson Becker, who opened a school of penmanship and would eventually get a patent for a device that would help students learn to write properly. Charles Judson Becker would die in 1935. So he was right on the outskirts, right at the very edge of the end of Jim Crow, but not quite into civil rights. But what we understand, based on what was going on in Massachusetts, the Becker family broke through. They were doing some amazing things. And I need to bring in a difficult part of this conversation. Do you see the difference in complexion between Martin and his sons? That is due in large part to Martin's wife, Carolyn, a beautiful light-skinned woman. She was of Indian descent. And we do believe that the complexion component played a role in the Becker's later life. It's difficult to say that, but we need to acknowledge that this was also going on in America. And I think we touched on this colorism piece the last time. This is an advertisement that we found for Charles Judson Becker, his writing school, engrossing of diplomas and resolutions. And we so appreciate our colleagues in Pittsburgh because they've done a tremendous amount of work. And we're very happy that we can partner with them on this piece. I want to tell you one other thing about the Beckers. Charles Judson Becker would have another son named Leslie Earl. Leslie Earl would eventually move the family to Los Angeles. He retired as a postal worker. He had another son named Leslie Earl who became a doctor, and he lived in Kansas City. That Leslie Earl had a sister named Nellie Slayton. Nellie Slayton would go on to found an organization, the Pan Doctoral Association for African American Students, which still exists today, that helps African American students get their PhDs and their doctorates. I was trying to find some data because I wanted you to see her face. So I'll have to send you an update on that. But I wanted you to see that 3, 4, 5 generations away from this Black man, his family has taken the family to a whole nother level. And all of that through the progress that was happening in one part of the country, but wasn't happening in the rest of the country. The inequity, the disparities were very clear and very present at that time. As we get a little closer back to McLeod, I also wanted to talk to you about culture as a resistance. And I've made note here of the 6 beaches that were accessible to Black citizens. This would have started shortly after the 1868 timeframe. Black folks could not go to Folly Beach, which is 6 miles away from McLeod. They had better not show up there at night If they dared to go, they had to go with people that they knew. But they could go to Seaside Beach in Eddystone. They could go to Fraser Beach on Johns Island, Peter Miller's Pavilion in Red Top, which is not that far from McLeod or from Caw Caw, our sister property. Mosquito Beach, which is about 10 minutes away from McLeod. And if you do a little research on Saul Legree, you will see an entire community. Many of those folks are descended from people who were enslaved at McLeod. And they made Mosquito Beach a very, very hot spot. There was music, there was dancing, there was culture. Many famous Black artists in the 50s and 60s who could not stay in downtown Charleston could stay in Mosquito Beach. And then there was Riverside Beach over in Mount Pleasant. And some of you may remember something called Atlantic Beach, which is now in North Myrtle Beach, another spot for popular entertainers. These beaches represented the strike back to the beaches where people could not go. And it is unfathomable that in the 50s and 60s, Black people could not go to a beach where the majority population was white. This was still pushback and resistance, which I guess one could argue, well, we saw more of that in the South. And people come to McLeod all the time, family, and they'll say, well, I'm from up north. We didn't have that. And I'm thinking, but where were you from that you didn't have this? This was everywhere. It simply took different forms. So I wanted to throw this in to talk about the culture as also a pushback on both sides. This was a picture of the Seashore Lodge, Seashore Farmers Lodge on Saul Legree, also on that island, right down the street from Mosquito Beach. I wanted to include this because if you all come to Charleston again, I want you to make a point to please go there. That handsome gentleman you're looking at, his name is Dr. Ernest Parks. Dr. Parks has been in a number of movies and feature films. He's a tremendous actor. He's also a reenactor of the Massachusetts 54th. The building behind that him is a museum, and it contains Civil War mementos, poetry, artists' work from all over Saul Legree. The Farmers Lodge came about at the turn of Jim Crow to help Black residents with insurance, with burial, with land, because they could not have access to lawyers. So they learned to do these things on their own. And the Farmers Lodge is a hidden jewel in Charleston. So if you come to McLeod, I'm going to make sure that you go and visit and say hello to Dr. Parks. His grandson is now working at IM, the new International Museum, helping it to get on its way. I've called this section now The Journey Back. And I want to tell you what I mean by that, family. When we look at the Dawsons and their ancestor, their descendant, Sharice, she's tried to piece together her whole family history going back to Pompey and coming all the way forward. But in order to do that, she's had to take a hard look at some of the truths of the plantation life. This is also true of the Browns, who also come back to McLeod. And I'm trying to make the point that at some point, Black people are coming back en masse to this, the place where we said we would never go back, because there are answers there. There is healing there. And I hope there is a sense of peace that happens. Each of these photos represents that. The one on the left, this gentleman here, his name is Bishop John Gathers. His family was enslaved at McLeod going back to 1800. And we believe that his original ancestors came directly from Africa. Bishop Gathers had a sister named Miss Robertsina. She lived in cabin 9. And he left as a small boy. So he didn't know all the work that she had done in and around McLeod. But he came back to visit us last year. The day that he came back, this very picture would have been the 71st birthday of his baby sister. She is buried behind that cabin where he's standing. And we put flowers there to remember this little girl who only lived 26 days. Bishop stayed with us that day, and he talked to everybody who walked by about his family. This couple just happened to see him and they said, "What is your connection to this place?" And I mean, he talked to them for a good 25 minutes. So we're thinking that we'd like to have him be an honorary tour guide at McLeod because it brings him a sense of peace to come back and to visit, and to walk the grounds and to talk to people who are coming to learn about what happened during that time frame. So his family, slavery, post-Civil War, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, they did not leave McLeod until the 70s. That's how long they stayed. Robercina left, but came back as a nurse. And do you know who she took care of? The last McLeod man who lived there. So they are completely wrapped up in the dirt, in the soil. That's one story. This couple in the middle, I'll tell you the truth, I don't know their names. I was upstairs on the second floor and I was watching them walk the grounds. And every now and again, she would start crying and he would stop and put his arms around her and comfort her. And when I last looked out the window, they were walking down toward the water together. I wish I had gotten their names. I didn't. But what I see when I see them walking away together is a resolution and a peacefulness about that place and what they came to get out of it. At least that's what I hope in my heart. This third picture, this young lady is holding a photo. That's her when she graduated from college. That's her grandmother and grandfather. They were able to be there and to see her make that crowning achievement. Grandma and grandpa are gone now. She came to McLeod, and you see that bag over her shoulder. She had her master's degree, the robe that she wore, and her cap and gown. And she said, "Can I please take a picture here? Because I'm very certain my ancestors came from here, and I want them to see me." And I'm just sobbing my eyes out. And how could I tell her no? I didn't. And I also didn't tell her that we didn't have a record of her great grandparents. We had nothing, but she felt a connection. And it brought her such joy to put her cap and gown on and to take a picture out by that tree, believing in her heart that her grandparents and great grandparents and all those who came before were looking at her smiling. That's the power of what this place can do for people and does for people. And this is why I call this the journey back. And at some point, we've got to go backward and reclaim the pain and reclaim the grief and channel it into something meaningful and powerful that gives us the strength, both as white and Black Americans, as Native Americans, as our Jewish family. I'm getting emotional here, sorry. To go forward. We've got to take back the pain and use it to go forward. And this is what I think one of the greatest gifts that McLeod offers, why I think people are just bursting at the seams. There's something in the soil. And my hope is that America is ready to receive whatever that something is. What questions do y'all have for me? Did I lose y'all?
No, we're good.
No. I don't have a question, but I just thank you for, it's moving and inspiring, wondering, how we can participate in that moving forward. We're here in Illinois, you're down there.
Yeah, I think about that. I can give y'all all that I have. And at the end of the day, y'all are the boots on the ground. You are where the action is. And so how do you figure out what can we do? And that's a thoughtful question. That's a lecture. That's a sermon on Sunday morning, right? What do we do? And it starts with a conversation like this. Really and truly, it starts with a conversation like this. And I applaud you for having it, because it's not an easy one, particularly when there is a move afoot in this country to shut down this kind of teaching. I mean, let me tell you how this CRT really is in our face. If this legislation should pass here in South Carolina, no teacher will bring her students to McLeod. She could not afford to, she would be sued. So what does that do for us? Where will people come from? How do we fight back? How do we say, this is 2022, you cannot shut down the truth now? But that this nation is even contemplating that. What does that say about us? It's an interesting question.
One question, you talk about teaching. What do you know about the problem teaching history in our schools today?
Say that again. I lost a little bit of that, sir.
About the progress of teaching Black history in our schools, high schools or whatever.
Well, let me address from South Carolina's standpoint. There is a core curriculum standards that sets out bullet point by bullet point what teachers can teach, and it tends to be very limited, hits the high points only, and is over pretty much in about a good 2 to 3 weeks. The high school level is a little more involved. I have a 4th grader in my world, so I see what she's doing, but it's limited. It's not extensive. It doesn't even cover what we've covered in our 2.5 hours together. If you put the time together, February 7th till now, I think we probably cover far more. If this legislation passes, that'll be probably cut down to 1/3. And you won't hear about these other pieces. So it's in the schools, but it's limited. I'll also add this. When we have Black History Month, teachers in elementary school have to send home permission slips asking parents, can your child participate? They literally have to get permission. And if the parents say no, then the kids are out of the process. I don't remember that in elementary school. You didn't need permission.
No.
But now you're going to need permission.
Wow.
And if kids go home and say, the teacher said, and it hurt my feelings, now we've got grounds for a lawsuit. This is where we are, family. This is where we are. I want to show y'all, go ahead.
You take the mask down, Sharon.
I was just wondering what your take is on this. My sister has lived in North Carolina for about, 20-25 to visit. It just has a different feel than
Yes.
up north. And the sense I have that they're still kind of fighting the Civil War a bit down there.
Yeah. You're not imagining that. It's true. It's absolutely true. And if you say too much, people really get upset. Let me put it like that. To the point where they're ready to do battle.
Yeah.
It's unnerving for us.
It's a defensive thing. There's still a fight going on.
The mere fact that it's called the war between the states in booklets, in pamphlets, in publications says volumes. It's not the Civil War, it's the war between the states, the war of Northern aggression.
Yeah.
Even now to this day, it's still that. So yeah, that gives you a mindset. Sometimes people come to me at McLeod and they say, what in the world, why am I here? I said, you stepped in a time machine. You have come back in time 100 and some years. And it's very hard for people to process. And the downside to that is a lot of young, talented folks leave the South. They go to Washington. They go, why would we stay in Charleston and fight this battle when we could go elsewhere and have a life? And that doesn't help us at all.
So it's helpful, validation of people's actual story and experience is very helpful. Is it in connecting and honoring what people went through? I wish I could put it in words what I'm trying to figure out. Listening to people's stories and what happened to them. And making it public so that it's not something they have to apologize for. It's something that they don't have to explain. It's something that we say, I'm sorry that you had to go through this. What can we do to connect in a new way? Does that help? Would that be something we could do here?
Well, let me say this. I think you don't need to apologize. The fact that you care is enough. The fact that you are sensitive to what happened is enough. The fact that you understand the economic, financial, and education connectivity of it all, that is incredibly powerful. It isn't about an apology. You are not responsible for ancestors 200 years ago, right? We're responsible for now. We are impacted by the decisions that they made, yes. But let's take apology off of the table, because that really makes people so upset. The other piece, though, that you said, the connectivity. How do you let people know that this issue bothers you, concerns you, that you care about it? That's the piece where the church, I think, has such a strong voice, because our model is Christ. And at the core, he was the chief voice on injustice, right? So we have a strong advocate coming from that piece of it, that he saw us all as equal and saw potential in all of us. That gives us a good foundation on which to work, that in some ways kind of eases race out of it. Because if you can ease race out of it, let me say this now, and hear me how I'm saying this. If you can build a bridge that doesn't rest on race immediately, you can talk about race on the other side of that bridge. And this is what I find at McLeod. In sharing the stories of Leah, nobody brings up, well, this is a Black child, I don't care. What they hear as a parent is, oh my God, how would I feel if my child were taken? So the empathy, the sympathy, the connection is built around humanity first, race second, and now we can talk. And that makes a huge difference in cataloging these stories. This is why we tell stories, because it gives us a door in which to connect. And that is an interesting piece. I had an idea for y'all. Have y'all as a unit done your family tree? Does everybody know their history and how far back it goes? Because that's a great starting point in seeing what you have in common and where the gaps are with each other.
I have another.
Does anybody know how far back their history or their tree goes?
Yeah, I kind of do. Yeah.
Does anybody?
What happens
I got
there?
about 3 generations.
Okay. So let me pose another question. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I just have a question. This is just sort of random. Have you watched Blackish on television? And I feel like I've learned things from it.
That's good. I actually have never seen Blackish. I'm usually not home to catch regular TV. I'm always at meetings late, but I'm aware of that show and its impact. And that's great. I understand it's going off, right?
Blackish. I think white people could learn a lot from Blackish. Also, are you familiar with Austin Channing Brown? Her name.
That's very familiar.
She has a book. It's so, and she was here on Zoom at a presentation that one of our local universities had. I would say look at Austin Channing Brown, I think is her name.
Okay, I'm writing that down right now.
What's the book, Sharon?
I don't remember the name of the book, but one of the things I remember from it is she said, she's a Black woman, and she said, it's not my job to teach you about.
Mm-hmm.
I liked that. I liked that because I sometimes feel that we're white people asking Black people to teach us, and we're not kind of, that still to me has a sense of superiority.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
see what
That
you're
just
saying.
was me.
No, I understand what you're saying.
Oh,
This comes up quite a bit too when
the book.
these situations happen with, it's called the Karen syndrome. Are y'all familiar with that?
Yeah.
And so it kind of like, how many times does this have to happen before y'all understand? Let me share something with you too that's very personal, that happened to me just a few days ago. There's always great concern about Black women's hair. And there are times when I just want to scream, get out of my hair. And I'm wearing braids today. These are braids. And one of my coworkers, a white male, got this close to me and he said, oh, this is quite a look. How long did it take to get like this? And who did this? And he was examining me as though I was a specimen in a lab. And it really made me feel sick. It made me feel very sick. And a few months earlier, another coworker, a white female, was standing over me, looking in my scalp, trying to figure out how is this connected? And I'm thinking, but I'm a human. What gives you the right to examine me this way? And I wanted to say to both of them, let me talk to you a minute about what you've done. But then the opportunity went away, and I was discouraged from following up on it because I'm thinking I have to work with these folks. If I take this too far, it's going to have a consequence that maybe I'm not prepared to deal with. So I bore that injustice, right? What do I do about that? Why do I have to continually say, get out of my hair? This is the reality.
Do you think you could, what would happen if you would say, do you realize that I feel blah, 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 blah from what you just did? What would happen if you shared your feelings with the people?
I would be regarded as militant and hypersensitive, and I made them cry. And if that's the worst thing a Black woman can do is make somebody cry.
Oh,
Bingo,
wow.
who said it? Hey, that's it. I can never be angry. I can never be upset. I can never show emotion, just like Barack Obama couldn't either. We have to be good and cool all the time because we'll upset white people if we start getting angry. So I have to endure.
What if you're just sad? Is that something that could,
Hypersensitive.
that you could express?
Angry.
Yeah.
There would be risk.
Okay.
There would be risk. And let me say this goes all the way back to the plantation when white folks had complete control over Black people's bodies.
Yeah.
And had license over every part of us.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing, I'm sorry,
No, go ahead, I'm listening.
I'm guessing the white people have no idea of the effect of what they might think of as interest.
And
You know what I'm saying? And so it's very instructive. Except how do you see your blind spots, which I would call it a blind spot, unless somebody, teaches you or calls it to your attention. So it is.
On the converse, I bet it's funny because I bet you probably, a lot of Black women can relate to each other, to the point where it's kind of like, how do they not understand that that's not okay? Right. I kind of like that about social media because people who don't even know each other, if they go through common life events or common things that have caused some offense, it's like they make memes for that now because it's just like, oh man, like in a funny way, to deal with
Right.
uncomfortable conversation. I kind of like
True.
some of that is, mhm.
Exactly. It's an ongoing struggle, family. I can only encourage you, but I'm strong enough to withstand it, but I do use it to talk about. And it's important. It's important that we honor each other's humanity in this, which is why I so respect y'all, even getting together to talk about it. If everybody would get together and talk as you all are doing, a lot of this stuff would go away because it would bring awareness. At a minimum, someone asked me, well, how's the group in Chicago? I said, they are doing great because they're talking to each other. They are talking together, and it's a priority for them. I want to share something with y'all, if I may. I'm going to flip this. Don't laugh now, okay? But I was wishing I could be there with y'all. And so I prepared some dinner. This is shrimp and grits, very, very famous meal here in Charleston. How many of y'all have had shrimp and grits? All right, beautiful, beautiful shrimp. And then the other meal that I prepared virtually is meatloaf and green beans and macaroni and cheese, which is another famous one. And then my favorite, of course, is banana pudding. Gotta always have banana pudding because it just makes everything so sweet and everything so workable. I do see somebody put something in the chat. Oh, yum. Exactly. Let me ask you this. What other questions do y'all have? And tell me what you're going to do now. I would like to know.
Well, I have a comment because you had mentioned field trips for local people. Do you guys offer anything, like, I think someone alluded to this, but within our church, we have this discussion that we had for 2 weeks, but is there anything school related that not local people can participate in virtually?
Actually, we don't, but maybe we'll start something if that's something that schools would be interested in, or if you think that we could have a test case or a partnership with.
We have I'm embarrassed to say I haven't gone yet, but I need to. The DuSable African American History Museum here.
Yes.
And I haven't looked into kind of what kind of events for kids or school-aged children there are, but maybe even as a church, like we could organize something to go together and see what the latest, events, educational, seminars are and things like that. But do you ever partner with local museums?
We would love to. We haven't before simply because, no one's asked and we haven't done outreach, but we could certainly do that. I mean, this is the greatest advantage of technology.
Yeah.
We would love to do maybe we could do that.
Great idea.
So that would definitely be something to do that we could follow up on and do together. I would love that.
That map that you showed with the small area, even though it's still large in your eyes, I was kind of like, oh my gosh, like what is going to happen in 10, 20 years? Like, is there going to be developers that are just going to put pressure, to keep kind of cutting away the land area?
Oh, no, actually not. McLeod is protected. Okay. Always protected, so it'll never be developed. It will never be sold. None of that will ever happen. Okay. It'll always be there intact. Yes, ma'am. So that would be a follow-up to this. If y'all would ever want to do something with the local museum, I would count on y'all to set it up locally. Send me an email address and I'd be glad to reach out. If that's something we could do, I would be open to that. And is anybody coming this way this year?
Well, Wendy's down there. Wendy, are you on this call?
No, she's not.
Is Sally?
Sally Vasquez, yes.
No, Sally.
No. She had a family obligation.
Oh, yeah, she's got Allison. Well, Wendy's down there. She may come see you again.
Okay. Well, you've got my number, you've got my email. If I can ever be of service, just call and say, hey, even if you can't come to McLeod, just call me and say, Toby, we just wanted to say, hey, I would love to hear from you. Let us please keep in touch. And if I can be of service going forward, you know where to find me.
Okay.
Would you-
gonna say something, Terry?
No, it's okay.
Do you, before we go, can we pray for you again?
I would love that. That would be wonderful.
Okay. Lord, I just thank you for Toby. I thank you for her life. I thank you for her passion, for sharing what she's learned. And I just ask your blessing on her, lead her and guide her in all those she works with. Thank you that your love is bigger than our weakness. Thank you that you live in her and you are helping her to reach a lot of for her ministry there and ours here, that we are one in you, and that thank you for this connection, and do your best will through all of us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
And amen.
Thank you. You're great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.